Hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. And this lecture is going to be a Lambda lab, and it's just going to be a really quick recap of Lambda, just in case you haven't used it much recently. And if you already know Lambda really well, then do feel free to skip this one. I'm just going to show the Lambda function policy and execution role as well for a really simple Lambda function. So if you've got time, please join me in the AWS console. So here I am in the console. And you'll find Lambda under Compute. So just go ahead and click Lambda, and we're going to create a new function. So click on Create Function. So just make sure Author from Scratch is selected. And we're going to give our function a name. And I'm just going to call it my Lambda. And the runtime is going to be Python. It's going to be Python 3.7. And then the next thing that we need to configure is a role. And this role is going to define the permissions of our function. And we can either choose an existing role or we can configure a new one. So I'm going to configure a new one from one or more templates. So just select that option. I'm going to give it a role name. I'm just going to call it my Lambda role. So Lambda is going to automatically create this role for you with the permissions that we select from policy templates. And it's this role that's going to give Lambda permission to do everything that it needs to do. So for example, if you were creating a Lambda function which was going to read from an S3 bucket, it's going to maybe go in and terminate EC2 instances, read or write from DynamoDB, etc., then you would need to provide these permissions in an identity access management policy attached to this role. And we can choose from various different policy templates down here. So there's loads of different templates that you can use. So for example, we could add read-only access for S3. You can give it access to poll messages from SQS, send messages in SNS, use KMS to decrypt data, etc. So there's loads of different template policies that you can choose from. So I'm just going to add the S3 object read-only permissions. We don't actually need it for this function, but I'm just going to add it just to show you. And in addition to whichever template you select below, it's also going to add basic Lambda permissions for logging to Amazon CloudWatch, and it's going to add those automatically to this role. So once we've done that, just go ahead and click Create Function, and it might take a few seconds, but once that's been created, you should see this message: congratulations, your Lambda function has been successfully created. So we can now go in and change its code and configuration. So if we scroll down below, they actually give you this really cool graphical view of your configuration. So here's our function. And on the right-hand side, it's listing all the resources that the function's role has access to. So by default, you've got permission to write to the CloudWatch logs. And we've also got the Amazon S3 permission that I added a moment ago as well. So that takes care of any permissions that the Lambda function needs to take action. But what about the triggers for Lambda? And as you know, there are loads of different triggers or event sources for Lambda, and they've listed them here on the left-hand side. So you can select the ones you want, and you can add these as triggers to your Lambda function. So I'm going to add CloudWatch events. So now that is added and it's appeared on our diagram. To configure the CloudWatch events, we just need to scroll down, and I'm just going to create a new rule. I'm going to call it my CloudWatch events rule. The rule type, it can either be an event happening within your account, or you can trigger your function to run on an automated schedule. But I'm going to choose the event pattern. And there's various different events that you can choose from. So auto scaling events, EC2 events, events related to the health of your infrastructure, or RDS or S3, etc. So I'm just going to select EC2 and EC2 instance state change notification. So this means that anytime CloudWatch events detects an EC2 instance state change notification, that is going to trigger our function. So go ahead and click Add and Save, and that has saved. And the really cool thing about this is that you can come up to this diagram, just click on this key, and this will actually show you the permissions which are associated with your Lambda function. So just click on the key and scroll down, and it will show you the underlying policies relating to your function. So first of all, we have the function policy. And if you just click on info here, it will give you a quick definition of the function policy. So the function policy defines which AWS resources are allowed to invoke your function. So we have configured CloudWatch events to be able to invoke our function. So the effect is going to be allow. The principal is going to be CloudWatch events. The action is going to be to invoke our Lambda function. The resource is the ARN of our Lambda function. And the event source is going to be CloudWatch events. So that is our function policy. And then moving on to our execution role, here is our role name. And these are the policies which are associated with that role. So first of all, by default, Lambda is allowed to write to CloudWatch logs. So it's going to be allowed to create log groups, create log streams, and put log events. And the resource is going to be the log group created for my Lambda function. And then we also added S3 read-only access as well. So that is appearing down here as well. So there we have the function policy and the execution role for our function. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and test the function. So in order to test it, we need to go to configure test events, create new test event, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call it my test event, click create and hit test. And if that's been successful, you should see the green tick and execution result succeeded. If we click on details, then you can see below the result returned by your function, and it just says hello from Lambda. And if you click on logs at the top, that will take you into CloudWatch logs. You'll see the log stream that it's created, and it just sends some simple logs into the log stream, notifying you of a start and end, the duration, the amount of memory used, etc., etc. So only basic logs are enabled by default. And you can actually get a lot more logging out of Lambda. You can actually get Lambda to log data events, which relates to all the different function level events which are happening in Lambda, but they do not enable that by default, because depending on the activity of your function, that can actually generate an awful lot, and you are going to get charged for that as well. So just be aware that the detailed logging, and it's called data events, and it relates to the function level events in Lambda, that is definitely not enabled by default. So now I'm going to come back to Identity Access Management, and I'm going to show you the execution role that Lambda created for us. So if we go into roles, just going to search for Lambda. So it was my Lambda role. So this is the role that got created for our function. And you can see it's got the S3 policy, which I added. And then this is the basic execution role, which is added by default. So let's just take a look at that. And it's this policy which allows Lambda to go in and send logs to CloudWatch logs. So I'm actually going to remove that from my role. So there we are. That has been detached from the role. And then I'm going to come back to my Lambda console. I'm going to go into my logs, and I'm actually going to delete that log stream. And we're going to try and test our Lambda function again and see what happens. So just click on test, and it's actually succeeded. We're getting our status code 200, and it's telling us hello from Lambda. But let's have a look at the logs. We've removed the permission to write to CloudWatch logs. So we should have no logs when we click on this. And there we are, we have no logs for Lambda. So we have removed the relevant permissions from the execution role, and Lambda can no longer write to the logs. So that is everything that I wanted to show you around the function policies and execution roles. Just remember, the function policy defines which AWS resources are allowed to invoke your function, whereas the execution role defines which AWS resources your function can access. So that is the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.